The Reduce Cyber Risk Podcast, May 20th, 2019, Episode 37. Welcome to the Reduce Cyber Risk Podcast, where we provide you the training and tools you need to pass the CISSP exam while enhancing your cybersecurity career. Hi, my name is Shon Gerber, and I'm your host for this action-packed, informative podcast. Join me each week as I provide the information you need to grow your cybersecurity knowledge so that you're better prepared to pass the CISSP exam. All right, let's get going. Hey, all, again, this is Shon Gerber with Reduce Cyber Risk, and we've got a great, wonderful podcast set up for you today. Today's podcast is going to be focused on, again, we talked about last week, we are making a small pivot from what we've done in the past as it relates to cybersecurity, and the focus is on the CISSP and how you can pass the CISSP exam, along with taking that information and making it into utilizing it for the cybersecurity aspects for your career and for your business. So as we're dealing with CISSP, we're going to talk about a couple things, and we broke this down last time. We said into three areas. First one's going to be the CISSP and cybersecurity integration. The second one is going to be around CISSP training specifically. And the third is going to be around a CISSP exam question or questions that will focus on how to answer it and the answering behind it, or the explanation behind it, I should say. All right, so let's roll into the first topic. So as we're dealing with the CISSP cybersecurity integration, this is a reference from Secure Ninja, and their article they had around was failing the CISSP exam and what are some things you need to keep in mind if you do fail the exam, and some aspects you need to keep considering. Their test format, like we talked about in previous domains, as far as the initial domain with the CISSP that I've got provided on Reduce Cyber Risk, the test format is set up out of 700 or out of 1,000 questions. You need to get a 700, which basically means you need to get a 70% out of 100%. And the test is utilizing computer adaptive testing, otherwise known as CAT. Not the cat, the kitty, but CAT, the computer adaptive testing. You have the ability with taking the test to take specific breaks. You can get up if you need to get up and take a break. And they talked about this in the article, that you do have the time to do that. You also have that the time has shortened a bit. From the past, you had 6 hours to take it, and you have basically 3 hours at this point, but with less questions. So in the past, you had, I think it was close to 300 different questions. Now you have about 150 questions you can answer with the CAT. Now, this computer data adaptive testing is focused on how you take the test. So it weights the questions. If your questions are real easy, it'll give you more questions, and then it just keeps ramping up. If you pass the very hard, difficult questions, then it considers that you know the material, and you could potentially be done in as small as 100 questions. However, you need to focus specifically on one question at a time, because what I've learned on taking this test, the first time I took it, I failed it, and it did not do well. I don't know what the actual score is, and they never did tell me what my actual score was at the time when I took it. It was just either you passed it or you failed it. But when you focus on this test, and it's imperative that you kind of think about this, as you go through and you're thinking of all the different questions that you have to address, take one at a time, focus on the right answer. And if you don't know the answer, then what you do is narrow it down, the questions to the least. If you know for sure these questions or these answers are not correct at all, then just throw those out immediately. Cross those out. Because the simple fact of the matter is that if you do that, that'll dramatically help you with the test as well. And I talked about when it goes from 3 hours to 6 hours and being able to take a break. I did take a break. You have to, right? After X amount of hours, you just have to use the restroom. You got to stretch, let your brain air out. It took me about 4 hours to take my test, and that was something that I had to struggle with. It just took a while to do it. But with 3 hours now, you have less questions, which is a good thing. However, you just need to make sure you're on your A game. Now, the CAT, like I mentioned before, their algorithm is based on the ability for a difficulty of the question. So if you do well and you're able to take the test good, and you have a situation where you can work through these questions pretty quick. You could be done in as small as 100 questions, depending on how well you are. You also could be done in about 50 if you really aren't very good at it, and you run the risk that you don't really understand what the content. If it picks that up that you don't really know what you're talking about, it could be done very, very quickly. And I know these tests are extremely expensive. Last time I checked one and priced it out, it was about $1,200, so $1,200 US dollars. So that's a huge issue. Now, as we're going to deal with the objectives as well, they have changed. Now, I've updated my CISSP content at Reduce Cyber Risk to the most current April 2018. But of the things that have changed, I'll go through the 8 domains and tell you just kind of a little percentage. And this comes from, again, from Secure Ninja. They made the comment that security and risk management has changed by a negative 1%. Asset security has no change at all. Security architecture down a negative 1%. Identity and access management, there's been no change there. Security assessments and testing, it's been a plus change, so you've 1%. So it means if some questions have been added versus the other ones, the questions have been removed. The security operations is 3%. Security assessment is 1%, and those are increases. And then software development security has been no change at all. Now, one of the recommended readings they had in Secure Ninja on the article was around GSM encryption. The Agile, which anytime you're dealing with encryption, it's extremely important. And then in this case, you're dealing with mobile technology. It's very important that you understand the encryption around that. Agile software development, I deal with this on a daily basis, so you really need to understand Agile. TLS and SRTP, as far as the encryption for transport protocols. Threat modeling methodologies, it's important that you understand the threat and how you model that threat for your organization and for the CISSP, and then EAP as it relates to identity and access management. All right, let's roll into the CISSP training. Domain 2, asset security. And this is around information and asset ownership. Okay, in this objective, you need to determine and maintain information and asset ownership as it relates to the CISSP. Now, there are some key considerations you need to keep in mind as you are working down this path. Data ownership will change over time, and data ownership is an important aspect of anything that deals with information security. It helps to define who actually physically owns the data, so therefore, as you're looking to protect it, who has decision rights to ensure that the data is protected in the most correct and efficient manner. In most cases, IT does not own the data. Now, people may think that, and people may think that, well, since you're IT and you manage where the data goes and the systems that the data is housed in, that you probably own the data. That couldn't be far enough from the truth. It really should come down to a specific owner, and then typically it would not be IT. I would not recommend IT, especially if you're a larger organization, just because you don't understand what are all the nuances around protecting that specific data. So it will change over time, and IT should not own it unless it's absolutely necessary. They may be responsible for protecting the data, which, the security around it, because the IP owner, the data owner, may not know what to do to protect it, but ideally they should not be the owner of it. Now, there may be regulatory requirements that force your hand, GDPR, Chinese cyber law, etc., where it may come down to picking the owner is an IT organization, so you just have to kind of weigh that out. But those are things just to keep in mind as you're looking at determining the asset ownership. What does it come down to? Are you getting forced by some level of compliance and so forth? The biggest thing to consider about this is the owner is responsible for the data unless it is formally delegated. And this is where you have to talk to the owner, get their understanding and their buy-in that they are the owner of it. And you have to do that. They are responsible for the data. And in many cases where the CIO may actually be the owner of the data, and the board may require him or expect him or her to be the owner of the data, but the CEO may not know that. Now, that person may delegate it to another individual within your organization, but bottom line is there needs to be an owner of their data. And so I think have I hit that hard enough? I think I have. As you're determining the owner of the data, it's important to understand what is the first steps that you need to do. And it may come into that you have to go to your Active Directory groups to find out who might be the data owner specifically. Now, I've done that myself, and what I've run into in that case is that many times the person that's on the Active Directory group, the owner of that group, the person that is responsible for who has access to that group, is a situation where that person has left the company. They're no longer with the company. And so you may have to go and come back to the supervisor and say, hey, who is this person? And they'll say, well, Bill had that. Well, Bill left 7 months ago. Who has it now? So then you come into the situation, you go, you're going to have to pick somebody who owns this data. So it's important to understand that. And as an example I have is that, if you have the New York City plant floor group, if that's your Active Directory global group, who is that person that is in that group that is the owner? That defines it when you're dealing with Active Directory, a person who specifically will own the data, but you need to understand it within Active Directory, who is that specific person, and then delegate that person to those rights. Now, it's the folder names. You may have to be able to glean from the folder names about possible owners. It could be a situation where, like, R&D Group 3 is Bill Smith, and then Bill Smith hopefully is not Billy Smith or Balonthro Smith, and then he goes by Bill. I don't know, Balonthro. That's probably not a very good name. It's probably a really bad name. But anyway, that's the situation around Bill, and you may need to hunt that down and figure out who actually these people are. I recommend you reach out to the business owners because they're the ones that would understand mostly who would potentially own this, unless it's been in with IT for many, many years. If it's been with IT, then you need to, as a CISSP, you need to focus specifically on getting it away from IT so that they do not have the decision rights to be the owner of the data. Now, there's some various problems with no owner, and some of the problems without having owners, the data may not be adequately protected. And that is a high likelihood that the data will not be adequately protected if there is no owner involved. So basically, your secret sauce, the 11 herbs and spices that make your company work, may be shared on a network drive. And being shared on this network drive, they may have a situation where everybody and their dog has access to these things. Well, that would obviously cause problems. You need to also understand, without having data owners, who would you contact in the event of a breach? Who are the people that would be involved if the data was leaked out to somebody else? And then the impact of data loss is not totally fully understood. If for some reason there is an issue where this thing happens, the data may not be understood who actually owns it. So then what ends up happening, if there is a breach, you don't even know what was lost, what is kept, or anything. So it's very, very hard to know, hey, this data XYZ was accessed at this time. Did it leave? Okay, I don't know. Is it worth anything? I don't know. So it's really hard to be in that boat. You just definitely don't want to do that. And a security person strategy will definitely come into question. What are you doing? If you're the CISSP and you're the security person, it's going to come into question, what have you been doing? You've been drinking your lattes and just chilling out on the beach somewhere, or have you been putting things in place to actively protect this information? That's a real quick way for you to have a brown box and then somebody to escort you out of the building. So the key thing around this, though, is you need to understand these aspects, especially as you're dealing with data. You need to know who is the owner, how are they going to protect it. If they're not going to protect it, how do you protect it? But you need to understand who is this person. And again, it comes back to the tragedy of the commons. And what that basically means is that it's an area that everybody has some access to, but nobody has any responsibility for. Kind of like your coffee shop or your coffee area within your work, where people go to the water cooler, where everybody goes to get their coffee, their water, whatever it might be. Well, the thing is, everybody has access to it, but nobody feels that they actually own it. And since nobody actually owns it, then they just kind of turns into a mess, right? It's messy, nobody cleans up after it, and so forth. That's a really good example of the tragedy of commons. You don't want that to happen to your data. So it's important that you have a data owner. Now, what is IT's responsibility? Now, their responsibility is to protect the data per the owner's direction. Once the owner says, yes, I want it protected. Now, IT should do everything in its power to protect the data at its best ability. That doesn't mean you go and protect it so much and then don't talk to the owner. This is a relationship that you will have with the data owner to ensure that the data is properly protected. Again, if there's no direction, protect the data to your best knowledge and educate the data owner on what exactly is going on. You cannot say, this is not my problem, I'm not responsible. You are responsible. As a CISSP, as a security person, as an IT representative to the business, you are ultimately responsible to ensure that the data is protected. The buck stops with you. If you don't take that responsibility, you might as well just pack up your stuff and be done right now, because at some point in time, it will come back to bite you, and they're expecting you to take ownership. The CIO and the IT leadership, again, must take ownership if it's not available. The CIO is ultimately responsible for it, but as a security person who's studying for your CISSP, you are going to be responsible to ensure that it is secure. And now, if within my role that I do on a daily basis, I'm responsible for more and more information all the time, and they consider me the subject matter expert. Well, as a subject matter expert, it's important that I give them good guidance. And if I don't see that things are being properly protected, it's my responsibility to call that out and to ensure that it is protected. Now, leadership's responsibility, again, security leaders must be engaged with the business leaders. And then when in doubt, you need to drive leadership, as many will not make a decision, especially in IT. They will not make a decision. You will have to help them make that decision. That doesn't mean you be draconian. That means as a security professional, you have to have influence. And the only way you do influence is by educating and leading other people to this direction. Now, you need to make sure that you do due care and due diligence with that data. It's imperative that you do this as it relates to protecting the IT or the information that is under your care. Now, there's some last resort options as you're dealing with trying to figure out who owns the data. You can use a network logs to determine who had last access and contact those people directly. You can have a third-party inventory network and map of the data flows. This can be occurred by a third party coming in there, and they can then basically sniff your network to figure out where does the data go. And then from that point, you can take that information to kind of figure out who is the last person to access it, who is the last logical group to access it, and then say, hey, I need somebody to own this data. You may kind of freak them out to go, how did you find out? Because people don't really understand how all the tools work, and then especially as you're sniffing traffic, that may cause a little bit of a consternation with a couple people. Or the last thing you could do is you could turn off access and then see who screams, and they will scream or not. If they're not using data, they won't care. I've seen that as well. But it needs to be a methodical. That's it. Gosh darn it, I hate English. Third grade education comes back to bite me again. Yeah, basically, you need to have a methodical approach on how you do this. Just don't go flip the switch and say, see ya, I'm done. No, you need to make sure that you communicate with the people, that they are getting what you're doing and how you're taking care of their data. You can't just go flip the switch and say, I'm sorry, have a nice day. You need to make sure that you have a methodical approach on how you take care of their data. All right, so now let's roll into the CISSP exam questions, domain 2. And the purpose of this one is, this is the question. It's going to be, when you look at sensitivity of data, what items would be included as sensitive data? Now, sensitive data is a big, hot topic as it relates to cybersecurity. And this also comes into privacy, is how do you ensure that the data is best protected? And so the question comes into is, when you look at the sensitivity of the data, what items will be included as sensitive data? And these are 4 choices that would be available to you, and you can kind of work through those to see if that would be the case. But the first one is personally identifiable information, otherwise known as PII. The second one is protected health information, or PHI. And the third would be proprietary data. This could be proprietary data of almost any kind, but proprietary data. Or the last option is all of the above. All right, so what do you think it is? And then the drum roll, do, right? Okay, here it is. It's all, right? All of the data mentioned above is considered sensitive data. And in many cases, if the data is posted on websites out there on the internet, it is considered public domain. But it's available to everyone and is not sensitive. However, it could be considered PII, PHI non-sensitive, or PII non-sensitive. And so therefore, if it's posted out there, you still need to treat it as some level of sensitivity, especially as you're dealing with GDPR. Now, that's an aspect too. Just because it's in the public domain doesn't mean you can sit back and say, you know what, I just can't get to it. It's in public domain. I can't have to worry about protecting it. No biggie. I'll warn you, if you're a security professional and you take that attitude, you will pay for it. Do not take that attitude. Something just to consider there. So let's kind of go over some different aspects around PII. So the PII is basically any data that could potentially identify a specific individual. And that's what it's designed around. So it's personally identifiable information. And then any data is considered for anonymizing anonymous data. So if you end up having a situation where, like in GDPR, you have a person, and GDPR considers identifiable information in many cases just to even be an IP address of a computer system. So you need to understand that that data is considered to be sensitive, and so therefore you may have to anonymize it. This can be sensitive or non-sensitive. Non-sensitive PII is gathered from public records, corporate directories, etc. It's still considered PII, but it's non-sensitive. Sensitive PII is data when disclosed could result in harm to the individual when the privacy is breached, and basically stating that this should be encrypted in transit and at rest. So again, sensitive PII, non-sensitive PII. You need to understand those two differences as it relates to the CISSP as well. Protected health information, PHI. Now, this is a term given to health data created, received, stored, or transmitted. And this is by HIPAA-covered entities that may be dealing with sending this data to and fro. And this could be, as you know, in the HIPAA world, you may have a doctor, but then there's multiple third parties that are actually helping this doctor work. Each of those would most likely fall under a HIPAA-covered entity, especially if they're dealing with health data. And then these are all the business associates working in the healthcare world. And you need to be aware, if you're a CISSP working for a company and they are dealing with healthcare information, you need to understand the rules and regulations around HIPAA and the compliance requirements around HIPAA as well. And this is for the United States. The electronic health information is called little e PHI. And this is around the same type of aspects of PHI, but this is now focused specifically on the electronic form or versions of it. It is not the paper copies of it. Now, as you're dealing with protective health information, this really, they kind of break it down a little bit further. This is past, present, or future physical, mental health, or conditions. What does that mean? It basically means that if you had anything in the past, which is going on now, or you may have some challenges in the future, that data is protected under PHI, especially as it relates to the individual. And so therefore you must add proper protections to ensure that it is protected. Yes, that's it. Protections to ensure it's protected. Yes. Now, the provision of the healthcare is basically specifically to the individual themselves. So, Shon Gerber, my medical information falls under PHI and should be protected under PHI. Both my physical and my mental state, which is hard to believe at times, is quite unstable, but my mental health as well. Now, they also have your past, present, or future payments for the provision of healthcare. So this even rolls into not just my medical records. What have I bought? Do I get medicine for the condition I have where my eyeball goes left and my other eyeball goes right? Or I have my nose drips a lot, and so therefore I have to have a special medication for nose drippage. I don't know. It could be anything, right? But bottom line is that all of the payments that I make or you make for your health care is covered under the PHI aspects. Now, it's anything that's transmitted by electronic media, maintained in electronic media, or transmitted or maintained in another form or medium. That's all of that data is protected and falls under PHI and should be protected. Especially as you're a cybersecurity professional, you're going to have to deal with physical security of this stuff. In many cases, you are the lone person that will understand the physical aspects along with the electronic aspects. So don't just think of the attitude of going, well, it's just physical. There's somebody else that will take care of that. No, it'll be you. You will be the subject matter expert to understand how do you best protect the physical paper and the electronic versions as well. Now, as you're dealing with proprietary data, this is internally generated data documents that you provide to create your 11 herbs and spices. These are contain the technical or other specific data that makes your company run. And so therefore you must look at protecting it the best way you can. Again, these are all important to do, as it relates to proprietary data. It's important that you protect these things at the most optimum way you can. Safeguarding the data protects the competitive edge. You may have a competitive edge in a certain area. Your margins may be higher in a certain area, and therefore this widget, this process, whatever it is, makes you much more profitable. Well, you need to protect that, and if you protect that, that is what they consider proprietary data. It's also protected under copyright, patent, or trade secret laws. So these proprietary data is imperative that you do those things. So as you're looking at the CISSP questions, all of those fall under sensitive data. They're various forms of it, but they do have some level of sensitivity that you have to protect. All right, so here's the links that we have for we went through today. We have ISC² Training Study Guide, Tech Targets talks about PII, HIPAA Journal talks about the HIPAA Journal stuff, and Business Directory gets into proprietary data. Finally, the ISC² certifications are important. I have the Secure Ninja link is also available as well on the site. All right, hope you had a great day. Hope you enjoyed this podcast, and we will catch you on the flip side. See ya. Thanks so much for joining me today on my podcast. If you like what you heard, please leave a review on iTunes, as I would greatly appreciate your feedback. Also, check out my CISSP videos that are on YouTube. Just search for Shon, that's S-H-O-N, Gerber, and you'll find a plethora of content to help you pass the CISSP exam. Lastly, head over to Reduce Cyber Risk and look at the cornucopia of free CISSP materials available to all my email subscribers. Thanks again for listening. See ya.